sort of bigger picture, I think for me was just, it was the change in roles.
Yes.
Right? Because I went from being her daughter, and I'm the eldest in the family. So I had a very different relationship with my mom. I had my kids a lot earlier than my sisters. And so my mom was very active in my kids' life. I spent so much time with her. So we had this, it was a different sort of relationship. And so all of a sudden I go from being this daughter, she was my confidant, the person I went to for everything. And all of a sudden everything turned around. And I think that was like the hardest part of trying to figure out my role with her. Because
we at Dementia Solutions have come to notice how invaluable it is for family caregivers to learn about the stories of others. It has greatly helped families to not feel alone. Hi, my name is Karen Tyrell, and I'm a dementia consultant and educator, and the founder of the company Personalized Dementia Solutions Incorporated. And I've been in this field of dementia care for over 27 years, and I have seen the devastation that dementia has on the lives of families. We want to extend a warm welcome to all of you who are either listening or watching this interview today of a caregiver story. And today I have a special guest with me, and I want to welcome Kathy. Kathy and I met in the summer of 2018, and we feel that Kathy's story will really be beneficial to the families who are currently or who were on the dementia journey. And so I want to say welcome, Kathy.
Hi, Karen. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really pleased to be able to be here and to share my story with you.
Oh, we're so, so grateful. And again, you have such invaluable information because I remember your story and watching you through it all. And we feel that this is going to make a huge difference. So I can't thank you enough for wanting to do this for us. So maybe let's get started by sharing a little bit about your overview of caring for your mom.
Hey, well, it's interesting. On March 6th of this year, it's going to be actually 3 years since my mom passed away. And it's funny, like having had that 3 years, I've had so much time now to reflect back on that, what I call like the 9-year journey, which was from the time my mom was diagnosed through until she passed away. And it was a journey that we were so unprepared for, a journey that had no guidelines. There was nothing that there was no manual that told us, what to expect, what was going to happen, how to handle things. And, so that was just such an important part of that story. Sort of all the things that I know now that I wish that I'd known, when it all started. There is a we in this. It's not just me. I have two sisters, one who is a couple of years younger than me, and then one that's 10 years younger. So this was a journey that the three of us went through. But for me, I probably did sort of the bulk of the care for my mom because she lived with my husband and I for 3 years. And so we were all involved in her care. And I think the best way to describe, or when I look back at the whole thing with my mom, it was like there were four parts to the whole thing. So there was that whole diagnosis and managing things because my mom was still living on her own in Campbell River. And my sisters and I were living here in the Lower Mainland. So it all started when she went to get her driver's license renewed when she was 80 years old, and the doctor wouldn't renew it, and said that he felt that she had some early signs of dementia. And that was kind of like what started the whole process. The other thing about my mom is she lived on her own because my dad had passed away back in 1992. So my mom she was a former nurse. She was retired now, living on her own. She had dealt with some serious health issues. She'd had a cancer in the early 90s and lived with a colostomy. So there were sort of all sorts of things that were going on for her. She tended to be a bit of an introvert, and she had friends and stuff, but really sort of liked her solitude. So she was fiercely independent, very private about sort of her health and all of those, all of those, and all these factors, her being a nurse, all of these different factors came into play, with her diagnosis. And so the big thing during when she was diagnosed was that she just didn't want to talk about it. It was really hard to have a conversation, and that's something that I wish we could have done and had those really heartfelt conversations around the things that she really wanted for herself. But it was like she just didn't want to talk about it. So it made it really difficult. Anyway, she was, like I said, fiercely independent. It was her biggest strength. She was a fighter right till the end. But that personality trait also made it a little bit challenging. So my mom could be really, really difficult, and it kind of exacerbated as the journey, that dementia journey progressed. So anyway, that was kind of that first part. Then things began, things were progressing. We were trying to manage things, from here with my mom in Campbell River. And then that was, there was a whole story around what happened, but we ended up moving her to Vancouver to live with us. And it happened very quickly with very little consultation with my mom. It's just, we had to make sure she was safe. And so we brought her to Vancouver, and she moved in with my husband and I, and lived with us for 3 years. So that's a whole other story. Like there's these chunks, right? And the hard part about moving her was that we never took her back home again. She never saw her home again. And it was just, again, there was a whole strategy around that. We were, it was hard enough to get her to Vancouver. And so she never, and that was a big piece for her, because she never stopped talking about wanting to go home and wanting to go back to Campbell River. So anyway, so she lived with us for 3 years, and you'll hear a little bit more about that as we get into this a bit more. Then there was part 3, which was the actual move to the care home. And, so there was a whole decision-making process around moving her to a care home, and then how were we going to do that? And then the time that she was in the care home. And of course, that was a real challenge because the pandemic hit 6 months after we moved my mom into the care home. So there's that whole piece. And then there's the aftermath, right? So it's after she passed away, and then the process that you go through trying to kind of make sense of everything that happened, and making some peace with it. So yeah, so it's hard to kind of put it all into words as to what it was like to care for her. When I look back now, I often think, oh my God, I don't know how I did it, or I don't know how we did it. It was so hard. It was so emotional. It was stressful. It played havoc in the family and with all the family relationships. But, it's one of those things, like when you're in the midst of it, the strength that comes from somewhere, and you just find a way to do it, because you're just going to do it. But as I said earlier, there's no guidebook. And that was the hard part. So, you learn, it's trial, it's error, you make mistakes, you pick yourself up, you educate yourself, and you just kind of go on. So yeah, so that's sort of a bit of an overview without kind of getting into all the details of what went on. But it was about a 9-year period from the time we had a sense that something was going on to the time that she actually passed away.
Yeah, and I remember coming into this journey with you when she was living with you. And wanting to go back home to Campbell River. And so that's where my journey started with you, to watch you go through what you had to go through as a family, and which was really heartbreaking for me to see what you were going through. So not an easy journey for sure, but there's going to be some positives and difficult times as well. I noticed that when I talk to families, they say there was some positives around it. But I just want to ask you, maybe just share some of the real toughest moments that you had to go through.
Yeah, there's so many, there were so many different things. I mean, there were some things that were just those practical everyday things where, trying to get her to take a shower, right? You'll remember that, Karen, around, oh my gosh, she just decided she wasn't going to shower anymore, and that's all there was to it. I mean, there were those kinds of practical day-to-day caregiving kinds of things, but the sort of bigger picture, I think, for me was just, it was the change in roles.
Yes.
Right. Because I went from being her daughter, and I'm the eldest in the family. So I had a very different relationship with my mom. I had my kids a lot earlier than my sisters. And so my mom was very active in my kids' life. I spent so much time with her. So we had this, it was a different sort of relationship. And so all of a sudden I go from being this daughter, she was my confidant, the person I went to for everything. And all of a sudden everything turned around. And I think that was like the hardest part of trying to figure out my role with her, because I just wanted to be her daughter. And I just, and I was watching my mom sort of disappear before my eyes. And I didn't, even though I'm a social worker and I have this professional background, when it comes to your own family and your own parent, I don't know, all of that stuff seems to go out the window, right? Because your emotions get so involved with it all. But yeah, so, and I think part of it is I was in denial, because my mom would have lots of really good days. And then I'd think, oh, she's just fine, and then something would happen and I go, no, she does have dementia, and then, and I think, and it was that figuring out the balance, because I mentioned earlier that she was fiercely independent. So it was this balance of how do I provide this care for her and still allow her independence, her autonomy, but yet I have to keep her safe. And there were certain things that needed to happen with her care, right? And there was medications, there was the managing of her colostomy, there were all these other health things. So yeah, so it was trying. She used to get so angry with me, and I knew it was because it was confusing for her too. Like all of a sudden, here I was telling her what to do, basically, and so it was really hard on our relationship. And Karen, I think back to Karen, when after your involvement, my relationship with my mom improved. Like it was so tense because I didn't understand enough about dementia. Then the practical things that you taught me and what you educated, and just those, how to deal with my mom, it shifted things, quite a lot. So it was just that role reversal thing that was going on. And then, and so there was one thing about caring for her in my home, but then when we moved her to the care home, that was a whole other thing, because then I lost my kind of like my identity, because I was my mom's caregiver. And then when you move her to a care home, I had to give that up. And in a lot of ways, that was a good thing, because then I could kind of be her daughter again to some degree. But I had to give up that, for lack of a better word, control. I had to pass that over to the caregivers, in the care home. And they kept telling me all the time, Kathy, we're going to take care of this. You just be her daughter now, So I think that was probably the hardest part for me.
That was a huge adjustment for you and for her and other family members when she did move. And it takes time after you were caring for her for those 3 years in your home. It took time to kind of wean yourself off of that role identity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I'm just going to add one other thing is, and then the whole pandemic, that added a whole other layer, because it was sort of 6 months after she moved in. And so then my role was really different yet again, because all of a sudden I'm the designated, I think that was the word at the time, the designated caregiver. And so that had a whole other set of responsibilities. I mean, I became the conduit for the rest of my family, because I was the only one really seeing my mom and having the contact with the care home staff. Before, my sisters could come in and out and we could all sort of be involved, and all of a sudden that stopped and it was all on me, right? And trying to navigate a crazy time with the pandemic, because nobody, I mean, this was unprecedented times, right? So yeah, so it was rough.
Really scary times too, especially when we heard about what was going on in care homes. And now here you were thinking like, wow, like, do we take her out? Do we leave her there? Like, what is going on?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So yeah, I could write a book about that one.
Well, what you're sharing, it does sound like a lot of what other families do go through, a lot of the similarities, but yours is very unique because of your mom's unique personality and her unique challenges with her health and the way she thought things were true in her world. And that's how it was. So it's difficult to adjust to that. But now just flipping to try to offer some positives of, what part of your experience did you feel was really positive, whether it's for yourself or for your family or, for your own growth?
Yeah, well, I think that my mom, every family's different, right? But I know for my mom, she had always said, for as long as I could remember, she would say to me, Kathy, she says, if anything ever happens to me, she says, please don't ever put me in a care home. And yeah, and that was always the message. Now, for other families, it was always just a given. It was always an understanding, that they would care for their parents. And I had always said to my mom, oh, well, we'll have a suite in our house. You can always come and live with us or whatever. But it was always this underlying message of that she never wanted to go into a care home. And so I guess the positive for me was that I was able to honor those wishes for as long as I could, and that I just, yeah, I mean, I was just happy. I was happy that I was able to do that for her. Yeah, I think that was probably for me, it was a privilege to be able to offer that to my mom. Not that it wasn't hard, but it was a privilege, and to spend that time with her. She was in my home, and we did, even as the dementia was progressing, we did have some fun together. She'd come upstairs, and she was in our suite. She had this lovely little suite down in our house, but she would come out, she'd hang out with us, and she became part of the family, for a 3-year period in a very intimate way. And I just will always treasure that. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. And then if I can ask you the question of what would you have liked to have known sooner on this journey? What would have helped you?
Well, the list is kind of endless on that one, but I think I mentioned earlier, about I've said it a couple times now, about being there, but there was no guidebook. Like I just felt that I just wish I had so much more information about what is dementia. What does it look like? How does it progress? How does it play itself out? Like I think that when the diagnosis happen and you get into the managing of the day-to-day kind of stuff that's going on, you kind of don't have the time and the energy to do the research or to ask those questions. Or I just felt like I was working full time. Right. I was a new grandparent. My daughter was having babies, and like there was so much stuff going on. And I don't know, like I just, I kind of plodded along with things. And so I kind of just wish I'd had that more concrete, practical information up front. And I eventually got it, but I felt that it was a little bit late in the game, So I wish so it's just, I wish I'd educated myself sooner. But again, I think it's a little bit of being in denial, where to get that information. You're just trying to deal with sort of day-to-day stuff. I think the other thing I was going to say is that I think I also wish that we all know the system out there is pretty confusing and complex and hard to navigate, right? And so I think I wish there was a way that I could have gotten really, again, concrete, tangible information about what services are out there and how do you get those services? I spent a lot of time trying to figure that out, and with a lot of frustration and whatnot. So yeah, I think it was just information.
Okay.
But then there's that readiness to receive it too, though. So.
All right. Yeah. That's human nature for sure.
Yeah.
So would a one-stop shop type of place where you can find the information be would have been important for you to kind of go to and say, okay, here are the resources. Here are some downloadable checklists, or here is videos and education about dementia, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Here's how it all kind of works. And I mean, in the end, I think that's what I ended up getting from you, Karen, when I learned about your services and what you had to offer. I mean, that's when all of a sudden it was just, I could ask those questions, and I was getting that information in a way that I could process it all and understand it and make some decisions about where and, what I wanted to do next around my mom's care. So, yeah.
Yeah. And that's one part that I love doing, is that I give the information to the families what they need in that moment. I don't tell them all the information.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about this, because it's one step at a time, because it can get very overwhelming, and we don't want to overwhelm people. We want them to be successful in that next step. So that's another challenge that a lot of families go through, is that information overload. And what do I need to know right now?
That's true. Because sometimes, if you get too much information coming at you, then it's overwhelming and you can't, it's hard to make sense of it all, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. You went through a unique situation, and I remember listening to you with regards to you being chosen as your mom's power of attorney and also her representative for her healthcare decisions. And, I'm just wondering if you want to share a little bit about that experience for that role and what that was like for you.
Well, yeah. So one of the things I was really happy about is that my mom had been very proactive around making sure that she had things in place, right? And so she had the will, she had the power of attorney, like all her paperwork, like everything that I needed to know, her house insurance, like you name it, like whatever. She was very organized that way, and all of that information was readily available. So I was really happy about that. I didn't have to get into any kind of pushing her to do this or do that. It was all there for me. So I was very, very happy about that. I mean, I think it may have caused some tensions around with my sisters, because it's like, well, how come I wasn't made power of attorney, and why is it you, and I think my mom's rationale around always is that I was the eldest in the family, and and it was just sort of that given. So anyways, I was glad about all of that. The representation agreement, I can't remember where I learned about that, but fortunately it was earlier on, and I can't remember if it was my own research or somebody had told me about it, but I was able to get that into place while my mom was still able to give some consent around that. And so that was really, really important.
Yes.
And then I also had a really great doctor with my mom. She was just this lovely young doctor who had just opened up her practice in our neighborhood. She actually did home visits, because my mom sometimes was so stubborn, I couldn't even get her out of the house to go to a doctor's appointment. And the doctor would actually...
Or a haircut appointment.
Yes, remember the hair? Yes. All those things, like she wasn't leaving the house, and that's all there was to it, so we had to come up with all these creative ways. But I had this lovely doctor who actually came and did house calls, but she also did the what do they call it, Karen? It's the end of life form that the doctor did with me at an appointment. And again, my mom was still, so I was asking those questions of my mom, like, and so she actually filled out that form, and we had it on hand. So it was pretty clear cut. My mom was always pretty clear about what her wishes were. So, but it doesn't mean that it still wasn't really, really hard. And it was this incredible weight and responsibility on my shoulders that, my sisters and I made the decisions together. But at the end, if there was any disagreement, like it was going to end up being me, right, that, had to make some final decisions. But yeah, it's huge responsibility. So, really important to have those conversations as much as you can, so you're really, really clear about it. It makes it easier.
I agree. And that's a very good message, because I have seen families who don't have these things in place, and it is so difficult. We might have to go through a situation where we have to get this commonteeship and go to the Supreme Court to get that control of their finances and personal health. Not easy. So as a quick reminder, it does make the journey easier if those documents are in place while they're living.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When they can make the choices and the proper decisions. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Not easy. No. And then so through all of this, when did you have time for self-care? Like, what was that like for you to take it easy on yourself and to take care of you?
I did, but it took me a while to figure that out. Like I said to you, and it was busy because I was still working full time, and so and my husband was working full time, and so we had this we were busy people, and and we were juggling so many different things, so I mean, unfortunately my sisters were always kind of there. Like they would, if we were going to go away for a weekend or, go away on a trip, my sisters would come and stay at the house. So we were able to work things through that way. But at the end of the day, even though I would do these things, I, take some breaks, and I made sure I built in exercising and all of that. But the thing about when you're caregiving for someone, it's with you all the time. And it's like, I always felt that even when I was away, I'd be this, and I don't know quite the word for it. It's almost like a hypervigilant. You're constantly in this heightened state because you're worried all the time. Right. And so I lived like that for so long in this heightened state. And I had to work really hard to sort of take lots of deep breaths and take those breaks so that I could kind of rejuvenate myself. Because, I'll admit that because I can look back on it now. At the time, you don't really see it. But it was like I felt that I was the only one that could take care of my mom. And I was the only one that could do it the right way, and nobody else could. And so that was a huge pressure to put on myself. But it's just, and for, anybody who's listening, and I think you'll know what I'm talking about, as a caregiver, right? And you fall into this role and you think that nobody can do it as well as you can. So I think that big thing is the big part of self-care was allowing other people to help. And being open to it.
Reach out for that help and be open to it. Yes.
Yeah. Because it's easy to kind of isolate yourself and just say, oh, no, I'm fine. But you know what? I wasn't fine. And I can look at that now, but I wasn't fine at the time. Yeah. So,
So you've said a lot of things that I think are going to really resonate with some of the people listening. But is there any final message that you just want to share with others?
Yeah, I jotted down a few things because, again, I was saying that, I've had some time to kind of reflect back on this now. And, if you'd asked me these questions maybe 3 years ago or 4 years ago, I don't know if I could have answered it in the same way, because it's all you keep processing it. Like even after my mom's gone, this is 3 years later, and I'm still processing it. So but anyway, I think that the big thing I want to say to anyone who's in a caregiving role with a loved one is that just, don't be afraid to be the best advocate that you can be for your loved one. Sometimes I think people get kind of afraid or to question, the system. I've had people say, oh, I don't want to push too hard because, I might get denied services, or, people are scared, so just don't be afraid to advocate, ask those hard questions and be assertive. Those systems are complicated. They're hard to navigate. So and if you need support, to do that, then, so advocate, and educate, like just, whatever you can do to get the information that you need to understand dementia and I know it's different for every person, and it looks different in every family, but, at least equip yourself with that basic information. And I just wish that I had done that sooner. The other thing I just mentioned is ask for help, accept that help. You can't do it alone, and it's okay that you can't do it all. Like you shouldn't be expected to do it all, So ask for help. And you know what? Another big one for me, and I'm guessing others will probably know what I'm talking about, is that pay attention to all the family dynamics that are going on. Because in retrospect, I kind of wish that I had been a little bit more generous to my sisters. And I think that, because they were just as scared as I was, right? We were all navigating this together. And so I think that I wish I'd been a little bit more open to their ideas and to their suggestions, and as opposed to kind of resenting them and sort of wanting them to do more, because now, when I look back, we were all doing the best that we could in the situations that we were living in, and each of us was giving what we could based on our family situation. So I feel there was lots of things that were damaged in that relationship, and it's going to be a bit of a journey to repair some of that. So pay attention to that. And the other one that Karen really helped me with, this was my big takeaway, I think, in my mom's care was learning how to live in my mom's reality. And I guess I think I didn't really understand the progression of dementia, and I thought that I knew what I was doing, and thinking that she was going to get better or whatever it was. And so it was just simple things like I tended to argue with her about stuff. And I used to correct her, and I'd be like, "Well, no, Mom, that's not, and it made it worse. And this was what caused this tension in the relationship. And it got to the point where my mom was just angry with me all the time. And then when Karen came into my life and helped me to understand and how to just respond differently, so when my mom would say to me, "Hey, Kathy, I really want to go back to Campbell River, and I'm going to call a cab and I'm going to go, So, it was like, okay, Mom, I get it. Yeah, you want to go back to Campbell River, yep, the cab will be coming this afternoon, and you can go home." And then within a short time, she completely forgot that conversation. But what it did was it calmed her down. It made her feel happy. And yes. And so that's just one example. But that was a big one for me, learning to live in my mom's reality. Yeah. So, and I think the other one, this is just for me personally, it's going to be different for every situation. But, if you have your loved one living with you, or maybe they're in their own home, but a decision, there will come a time that a decision may need to be made as to whether they're going to move. You have to move them to a care home. It's really hard. It was probably that was hard. That was so hard, because I felt that. I think the guilt, I felt so much guilt. It was like, oh my gosh, I promised her that I would never do this. But the time came, right? And so part of what I think I learned from that was that I might have waited a little bit too long to move her to a care home, because I wasn't ready for it. My mom was probably ready to be in a care home, but I wasn't. And so that was a big learning for me. And I may not have burned out as much as I had if I had moved her there sooner. Yeah. And the last thing I'd say is, just be gentle with yourself. Everybody's doing the best, you're doing the best that you can. So don't beat yourself up, and don't buy into that whole guilt thing that goes on, right? Because we're also good at guilting ourselves out about things. And so just remember, you're doing the best that you can. You're making the best decisions, and it's a learning process. Yeah.
It certainly is a huge learning process. It's not an easy journey. And oh gosh, Kathy, I could chat with you all day. Thank you so much for sharing what you did. I know there's so much you could have shared, and some of the stories of how we got your mom to convince to go to the care home, and those types of things. But you did the best you could in the circumstance that you had. And so I want you to feel that and remember that you did everything you could for your mom from my perspective. So thank you for what you did to support your mom and your family, but also for being here today and sharing all this with anybody, because our hope is that it's going to empower some of the listeners to go, oh, wow, Kathy went through it. I can go through this. Or it helps people to realize your situation isn't always like far out there unique. There is a lot of families going through something similar, not exactly the same, but there are some commonalities. So we're hoping that if anyone's listening, to know that if you are feeling alone and you don't know where to turn, please reach out. We don't want anybody to do this journey alone. There's so much to learn. Know that we do have one-on-one support. Whereas I was helping families such as Kathy when they need it. You can contact us to register for your free 20-minute consultation over the phone or over Zoom, and we're happy to give you some understanding of where you're at right now and how we can support you. We also have support groups. So look us up on our website, dementiasolutions.ca. Maybe you might find it helpful to come to a support group. There are other ways that we can support you, so please don't be shy. Our phone number is 1-888-502-1321. or you can email us at info@dementiasolutions.ca. So once again, just wanted to say, you're doing the best you can, but please, please, please don't journey alone. Know that there are supports out there for you. So thanks everyone for listening.